Welcome back. You're watching Morning Express here on KTN News, and would now like to get into a conversation that is going to be quite a big headline this week, and that is about the budget reading that we expect Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich to read out to the entire country. Is going to be tomorrow. But in studio with us, I have a good number of journalists, very experienced, with a great wealth of knowledge in regard to economic matters. So in studio, to my immediate left, we have Paul Wafula, who is from the Standard newspaper, and we have Bella Genga, who is from Bloomberg, and we also have Peter Wakaba, who is from the Standard Group. He's actually the business editor for KTN. And would now like to get into a conversation. Every year we have the same old kind of way of doing things when it comes to budget reading. We'll always expect the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury to read out, budgetary allocations to the rest of the country in the National Assembly. And that is going to be the same thing that we are having. But this time around, we're going to be having the budget read on a Wednesday and not a Thursday. Paul, what do you think about that?
I didn't quite think about it in terms of the day.
Yeah.
I just thought about it in terms of how soon it is, in terms of how, from the time Treasury actually released the numbers to the time it's reading, and then too in terms of how soon after Parliament resumes, in terms of having, the Parliamentary Budget Committee has just been looking at this, and the report is not yet out. We were expecting the report yesterday. So he'll be reading just even before we're able to look at what really the recommendations of Parliament are. So I don't know if they'll meet overnight tonight and iron out the issues, or what will happen, so that he reads what Parliament will be agreeing with.
All right. And he did also put out, the budgetary estimates not far from today. I think that was about a month or so ago. And, we have seen a number of ministries that already seem to be left out. But Bella, I don't know, what are your expectations compared to last year, bringing it now into this year, looking at the budgetary estimates?
Well, I can't give my opinion, but from when we look at last year, a significant chunk of the budget went to infrastructure. You've seen the standard gauge railway, we've seen the 10,000 kilometer roads project, which kind of delayed in taking off, but from what I saw in the media yesterday, the Transport Cabinet Secretary says that has kicked off. So we are yet to see the fruits from the road annuity program. The fruits from the standard gauge railway line seem to be, are now visible. There was also significant spending on security, which was kind of broken down a bit, if you will. We saw the tourism industry got a bit of an increase in funding. You remember it was on its knees literally last year, given the security issues that were witnessed the year before, and there was a lot of hue and outcry because the golden goose was not laying any golden eggs, so to speak. So that had an impact on the shilling and currency, and therefore trade deficit and stuff like that. But we've seen the fruits from the significant spending. We've started seeing the fruits from the significant spending in security, and it's kind of helping improve the tourism situation. And those are one of the factors that are probably helping put our currency in a much better position.
All right. So a lot of people up until today, despite the fact that we keep talking about the budget being read and all these expenses and allocations, and that we have a certain percentage of a deficit, people don't really understand what exactly the budget is all about. And I guess this is where I'm going to bring Peter Wakaba in, so he can explain to us in detail, to the ordinary Kenyan who probably wants to understand what the budget is all about. How would you break it down for them?
Well, for most people, the reading of the budget statement has become a sort of thing that we do every year. And we do it over and over again. And it's become just that, something people just sort of take for granted. This creates a situation where most people don't pay that much attention because they say it's being done in Nairobi, it's Parliament, it's just going through the motions, doesn't really affect me. If you go down to the grassroots, just go to the man on the street and do something and ask them, what do you think of the budget? How does it affect you? They'll talk about the day-to-day prices of most commonly consumed goods, but over and above that, it mostly goes over their heads. The budget is actually just the same way budget would be for you. The government of Kenya is a legal entity, so to say it is a person, and it has a certain amount of money to spend. It makes a plan, just like we say that everyone should make a plan to spend their money. The budget is essentially a tax. It's supposed to be a tax and spend plan, but ultimately is not exactly that. It really is a projection of how the government expects to manage your money over the next 12 months. And the spending plan basically is a sort of cohesive plan that has been put together from all the ministries and different arms of the government in terms of prioritization of where the money ought to go, basically.
Okay. Yeah. All right, so we have looked at different ways of breaking this down over the years, but also we can't deny the fact that in the coming year, or this, financial year, 2016-2017, domestically financed expenditure is also going to shoot up. And we are looking at it probably going to close to about 400 billion shillings, up from about 305 billion shillings of the country's GDP that was spent last year. So, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not we can even finance entirely our own budget. And I guess, Paul, I would like to bring you in as well, and the rest of us, to talk about whether or not Kenya can finance the budget 2016-2017, because it looks like we are going to actually have a very big deficit.
Actually, financing of this budget, I'll be interested to see how Rotich, it will be a miracle in terms of how he will actually explain to us how he plans to finance it.
Yeah.
I say that because if you look at this new year that starts next month, he's talking about a target for the Kenya Revenue Authority of 1.5 trillion. That is about 300 billion shillings more than last year. Now remember, by April this year, Kenya Revenue Authority had only raised about 888 billion. That is like 2/3 of what it was supposed to raise in the year. So even the target for last year, Kenya Revenue Authority has been unable to meet that. Now you are over and above that, we are loading it with another 300 billion to raise. And remember, this is just on the internal revenues, as you see. And then you have to put this in the context of actually what's happening in the economy. You find that very many companies have issued profit warnings, and banks are struggling in terms of making provisions for bad loans, which is affecting the ability to pay taxes. Yeah. And you find a situation whereby the payee, that is pay as you earn, what the kind of money that the taxman actually gets off our salaries every month has stagnated, because not many people are employing, and the jobs that we are creating are not being brought on the tax bracket. So we find the people that are being taxed are going to remain the same, the companies are going to remain largely the same, but you keep rising that by 300 billion over every year. So what is going to happen is that you'll find at the end of the day, when the taxman is unable to raise that money, then that will end up into borrowing. And already, if you look at even our borrowing bucket, you find that we are going to borrow about 700 billion in this new financial year. That is quite a significant increase. It's about 14% from the last 2-3 years. So I find a situation whereby, I expect Rotich to probably increase taxes in the sin taxes, probably beer prices would go up, cigarettes, and those common casualties. But over and above that, the taxable capacity, there's only so much you can tax some products before you start seeing the negative impact. Remember, he tried that with the cheaper beer, I don't know what it's called, for East African breweries, and the consumption just dipped, and he had to reverse that on excise taxes.
Right.
So a balance of that will be something that will be really critical. But I think as much as we want to be able to do our infrastructure, we should be able to see if the economy can support it and if we can borrow. Because at the end of the day, if we have too big a deficit, then it becomes a big challenge in terms of repaying our debt.
All right. Bella, what do you think?
Well, certainly the cost of living will be impacted as taxes go up, and when you remember the excise tax was introduced a couple of years ago, it's going to be increased this year, and that will definitely affect things like mobile money transfers and bank transactions, because the cost will essentially be passed on to the consumer. So we're definitely expecting to see what impact the increase in the excise tax will have on financial inclusion, so to speak. I had a conversation with a couple of CEOs in the banking industry, and they say maybe the government should review the implementation of the excise tax in as far as supporting and encouraging financial inclusion is concerned. But suddenly, this government spending has a big spending budget. I mean, you've seen the very expensive projects that it is carrying out, even as it focuses on improving the business environment. You saw a lot of investment in energy. We've seen a reduction in our reliance on thermal, the expensive diesel-generated power. And now we've brought in geothermal energy, which is cheaper and it's clean energy. So there's been a lot of focus by government to improve the business environment. But at the same time, there's the cost aspect to it, which we must bear. And as Wafula talked about, KRA has been struggling or has been having challenges in meeting its targets. So it will be interesting to see what new creative ways the taxman will come up with this year in order to meet the 1.5 trillion target that has been set. So there's been push by players in the tax industry for them to widen the tax base, because as I understand, I think less than about 1 million Kenyans actually pay taxes. We wonder where all the other money is. So there's expectation that KRA will have to become overly creative and probably build on the iTax platform to draw in more fish into the tax net.
And remember, Joy, you know, this is what has pushed the taxman to become a bit funny. I mean, you've seen KRA coming up to come up with what it thinks some of the ways to get to the taxpayers. And it's talking about looking at your M-Pesa transactions, getting access to your bank records. It's basically doing anything it can be able to do to ensure that it can get one more shilling from you. And this, of course, borders on, on other issues in terms of privacy and why would the taxman, go to that extent. But if you look at in the back, every week it has to report to the government in terms of how much it's collecting. So if it falls far off, it has to find ways of doing that. So as this pressure really mounts on KRA, it has to find ways of doing this. We've seen it trying to go to the real estate sector, which it has basically, landlords have resisted every amnesty. You find only about 10,000 landlords honoring up to volunteer to pay, and we know how many landlords are in the country. So it's really up to the taxman to really go out and police and bring in new people, and it doesn't have that capacity. So you find even how you fund KRA has been an issue, because before it used to be 1.5%, 2%. So the government now it's a moving target. It decides how much money it can give to KRA. So KRA says we do not have enough resources to collect the money. The government says we can only give you so little, because as a tax principle, we should use as little as possible to collect as much as you can. So give KRA as little as you can and make them to collect as much as they can.
But speaking of revenue collection, do you think, and I'll pose this question to Peter as well, do you think that maybe we are getting to a point where the taxpayers are losing confidence in the government and saying, what's the point of me paying my taxes if at the end of the day this money is still going to be swindled, and then at the end of the day I do not get the services that I'm entitled to getting? What exactly is going on?
Well, from the outset, initially we'd have said lazy government is the problem, because usually what should happen in essence is that the government should continually innovate ways in which to widen the tax net. So in essence, to say that every year we should have a certain number of Kenyans coming into the tax net because they're getting into jobs, they're starting businesses, they're beginning to earn income in various ways or expanding their income. The problem with that is that there basically is a problem with job creation. There's a problem with wealth creation. In some places, the economy is actually shrinking if you look at the tourism sector. So there's the attrition of taxpayers. This then means that there's a continued pressure to widen the tax net in places where it becomes trickier to do that. I think we should be looking at it a bit differently. One of the least talked about ways of, in a roundabout way, financing the budget is the issue of national savings. The fact that we have to borrow externally and in other ways, simply because Kenyans are not saving enough.
Right.
And when you ask, what does that mean, essentially? Things like pensions, unit trusts. In a lot of more developed economies, the government has recourse to funds that should be lying in one place for 30 to 50 years because they're long-term funds. And these are used for infrastructure projects, things like roads, housing, and that sort of thing. If you did a simple survey, census of how many Kenyans are putting aside money for the future, even in terms of just simple savings, leave alone the long term, it's a very small number. And the problem becomes even worse when you think about the fact that the economy is mostly informal, such that there has been very little penetration of things like consumption of insurance and other things which will then drive consumption of those long-term savings initiatives, things like personal pension plans. How many Kenyans are doing that? How many Kenyans are putting something aside for in NSSF? So the question then becomes, what is being done to drive uptake in that direction? Because this is a sort of chicken and egg situation. Because if in 5-6 years you say that we have been able to rope in part of the informal sector to do this sort of thing, most likely those guys will also start paying tax because you then have a way of reaching them and identifying them. Innovation means that we don't have to continuously reinvent the wheel. I'm sure it has been done in other places. We need to, just the same way we came up with mobile money and M-Pesa, the ways and means in which we can ensure penetration of this sort of thing and thus create a way for people to participate incrementally in the economy.
All right. Let's talk about last year's budget as well. We did see the 2015-2016 budget allocation in figures that came up to about 2.1. And, you know, we looked at 1.51 trillion of Parliament's approved national budget. That was about, you know, 1.998 trillion for the financial year 2015-2016. You know, it did come down from 2.1 and it came down to about 1.51, if I'm not mistaken. But then if you look at the allocations, say the presidency was given 7.7 billion shillings for the cabinet, government advisory services, state house affairs, and you name it. And then the deputy president's office was given 1 billion shillings. If you look at the key ministries that took the bigger chunk of allocation, you talk about the Security Ministry, which was given 120 billion shillings. Devolution was given 93 billion shillings. Defense Ministry was given 92 billion shillings. Foreign Affairs and International Trade was given 14 billion. The Ministry of Education was given 154 billion shillings. We also saw the National Treasury being given 91 billion shillings. And it came down as well to the fact that we also saw the Health Ministry as well that took up a small chunk of the budget, which was 59 billion shillings, and 298 billion shillings went to the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure. And if you go down and also look at the others who took a bigger chunk, we'll probably consider energy and petroleum. But do you think that maybe we are prioritizing some ministries more than we should, the most critical ministries?
I think usually a budget is a good signal to see what are the priorities of the government of the day. And if you look at the Jubilee administration, it's been very focused on infrastructure. And of course, security became a nightmare and it had to turn around and put some significant resources into security. But I think what is important is to see what is the outcome of that. Are we spending too much? I mean, what are roads without healthy population using those roads? I mean, what are roads without food? I mean, for people to actually eat and survive, or even transport, or the goods that will actually be transported on those roads. So you can have the standard gauge railway done, completed and dusted, and it's moving, but there is nothing to carry on it. So I think there must be a balance in terms of what really, as we balance the priorities, we need to see how do we fund. For instance, agriculture is really important for us. So if we find the government, the only time it comes up into agriculture is maybe to have subsidized fertilizer here and there, drop in the ocean, then come with 2 billion to write off coffee debt here, give Mumias maybe 1 billion, and you know, give Mira farmers another 1 billion just to calm down. But is that significant in terms of boosting our export market? And this is what will actually be transported on the good roads that are being done and the beautiful railway that is being constructed. And then you find the health sector, for instance. This is really critical, and I think the Jubilee administration has come in far too late in terms of prioritizing health. If you look at it in terms of really, I mean, we had a convention where we agreed that we should be actually be giving about 15% towards health, but this has dropped to 10, it's now at about 8%. and it's really like, okay, now counties are in charge, they can do that. But remember, the national government is the one that's in charge of policy. If you don't have the right policy and don't develop the right tools, and then you see national governments in charge of the national hospitals and some of the big county hospitals. So I think health has been left out. If I look at it, it's not as invested in as we have expected. But by and large, I think the intentions are good. It's now a matter of how do you ensure that this money reaches to people. Because at the end of the day, yes, you have the money. You give devolution 90 billion and then 45 is stolen through NYS. Or you give education so much money and books, textbooks disappear in classrooms.
That too, yeah.
So I think it's a matter of balancing this, and then how do you ensure that you actually implement and the money reaches to the people that they really deserve. Otherwise, it will just be another PR exercise.
I think it's really important first to point out the fact that even more important for Kenyans than amounts is the first prudential financial management. Checking on how exactly that money is used. And I think one of the greatest tragedies in Kenya is that while we have the budget statement that the minister, the CS, does make, we really don't have a sort of situation where he comes back to report to us in one sitting and say in a statement to the world, in the same way just as he's doing in the budget, that this is what we achieved over the past 1 year. What that does is that it reduces the urge for the ministries to actually achieve what they've said. If you check on allocations and the money that was put aside last year, statistics actually at something like 38% of ministries actually stuck to what they said. When you look at the absorption of funds, maybe just apart from recurrent expenditure in terms of salaries and the like, development financing, very little of the money that was put into development projects has been absorbed in the way that was projected. A lot of that money is now back and is being reallocated. Well, we had a very pretty budget, maybe if we say 2 billion shillings. In reality, the amount of money that was actually spent in that entire budget is a figure that's very different from what was put forward. Because as like Wafula had said, we are very good in making very good budgets, but when it comes to implementation, apart from, of course, recurrent expenditure, it becomes really difficult for most arms of the government to actually police exactly what they say. If you look at, for example, this year, when they say they want to focus on finishing the projects that they've already started, and the government is in the middle of austerity, so revenue generation is a rolling process. It becomes very hard to police exactly how much has come in, how much has been spent where. For most Kenyans, it's actually up in the air. Apart from maybe when the budget office or the auditor general reports and says this is what we achieved, which is many months after the fact. There's really no way for most people to track what is going on. Hence the sort of mismatch between public perception of the budget and what really happens.
Right.
And remember,
Bella, if you were telling this story, say, to the ordinary Kenyan, how would you break it down for them in regard to what they should look out for? Say, if the budget is being read and a farmer, how would you want the farmer to what would you want the farmer to look out for as Reptich reads out the budget?
I like to look at it this way, just the way I would, if we go back to the kitchen, literally in your house, and you come up with that list every month of groceries and unga and sugar, and your budget for the month, you know how much you're going to spend, how much you're going to consume within that 1 month, and what you're expected to achieve from that. Like, for instance, your baby won't starve, or will have carry, this is what we've borrowed from donors, and this is how we plan to spend it. So one of the biggest headaches that we've seen for government is actually recurrent expenditure. And if you look at the dailies today, legislators are pushing for 4 billion shillings more. So it will be tricky, or it will be interesting to see how government will be able to sort that out, even as it talks about austerity. You remember towards late last year, the Treasury announced that they were going to control the number of trips, or to put a ceiling on the number of trips by government officials, and there was hue and outcry on that. But those are one of the measures that they are actually trying to put to manage this spending, to be able to also, in the spirit of prudence, so to speak. So it will be interesting to see how that will come out, even as the people who actually look at this budget proposals and negotiate and reallocate funds, because they've mentioned that they will reallocate the funds, if you look at the dailies, into the parliament pocket, which is already in excess of 20 billion.
That's true.
One of the biggest headaches will be recurrent expenditure. So therefore, as a farmer, probably in Homa Bay, and I'm focusing on sugar, and I want to see how government will support me. I want to see how much are they going to be putting in agriculture. This is the biggest contributor to
So
GDP.
agriculture is coming up as a top priority as well. I really wish we had more time for this conversation, but my director is telling me we're out of time. But I would like to say thank you all for joining us to have this conversation about the budget. It kind of feels like there's quite a lot that we have left out. But hopefully we can have a budget that at least will trickle down to every Kenyan, 2016, 2017. And we always have this habit of money not being spent, and then it's taken into consolidated fund, and then it's never used, and then you do not know where it goes, and then it's not accounted for. And then the country is losing 600 billion shillings to corruption, and you just don't understand where that money comes from and where it goes, and whether or not it actually goes down to the ordinary Kenyan. But thank you so much, Paul Wafula from the Standard newspaper, and Bella Genga from Bloomberg, and Peter Okaba, business editor at KTN. Thank you all so much for joining us for this discussion. Akisa Wandera is coming up next with the news headlines. That's going to be a news track, so do look out for that. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. Thank you for watching.